Sometimes the things our family mocks us for turn out to be the very things that save us. Sometimes what looks like a burden becomes the greatest blessing we never saw coming. Jack Mercer stood before the old warehouse with rusty keys in his hand. His kids had laughed when he inherited it. His brothers called it worthless junk. The whole family thought he was crazy for keeping a crumbling building in a forgotten town. But Jack remembered his grandfather's stories. He remembered the secret rooms and hidden blueprints. Most of all, he remembered something his grandfather once told him about a light that never goes out. Now, 30 years after his grandfather disappeared, Jack noticed something strange. While the rest of the building sat dark and abandoned, one window in the back still glowed with a warm light. What was still running inside that old warehouse after all these years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Mercer had worked with his hands for 43 years, and they showed it. Calloused palms, oil-stained fingernails, and a scar across his right knuckle from a wrench that had slipped back in '98. At 62, he still opened Mercer's auto repair at 7 sharp every morning, the same way he had since taking over from his father-in-law 3 decades ago. But these days, the bell above the door rang less often, and the parking lot held more weeds than cars. The town of Millbrook had been dying a slow death since the steel mill closed in 2010. What had once been a thriving industrial hub along the Susquehanna River now resembled a museum of rust and broken dreams. Main Street sprouted more for lease signs than functioning businesses. The young people fled to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, leaving behind empty houses and aging souls who remembered better times. Jack's own children had followed that familiar path. Sarah, 34, was a marketing executive in Boston who visited twice a year and spent most of those visits suggesting he sell the shop and move to assisted living. Michael, 31, worked in tech somewhere in California. Jack could never keep track of which company and called every other Sunday with the dutiful regularity of someone checking off a responsibility. His wife, Margaret, would have handled them better. She'd known how to bridge the gap between Jack's quiet, methodical nature and their children's fast-paced ambitions. But cancer had taken her 4 years ago, leaving Jack alone in their small house on Elm Street, surrounded by her garden tools and unfinished quilting projects he couldn't bring himself to move. The warehouse inheritance had come as a surprise to everyone, especially Jack's 2 brothers, Tom and Ray. They'd gathered in the stuffy office of Hartwell and Associates 3 weeks ago, listening to the lawyer read their father's will. Tom inherited the old man's modest savings account. Ray got the vintage Buick and the collection of fishing equipment. Jack got a deed to a building none of them had seen in 20 years. A warehouse. Tom had snorted, loosening his tie in the humid office. At 59, he'd done well for himself selling insurance, and his success had made him generous with unsolicited advice. "What's the old man expect you to do with that dump?" Ray, the youngest at 56, had been more direct. "Sell it for scrap and split the cash 3 ways. That building's been sitting empty since Grandpa vanished. It's probably full of asbestos and rats." But Jack remembered differently. He remembered being 8 years old, holding his grandfather's weathered hand as they walked through those same streets back when the neighborhood hummed with activity. Victor Mercer had been a quiet man, built like a tree trunk, with hands even more scarred than Jack's would become. He'd emigrated from Czechoslovakia in 1947, carrying nothing but a suitcase and engineering knowledge that somehow landed him work during the post-war boom. "Your grandfather was always secretive about that place," Jack's father had told him once. Years before, the old man's memory started fading. Said he worked on important projects there, government stuff maybe, but you know how he was with stories. Jack did know. Victor had filled young Jack's head with tales that seemed too fantastic to believe. Secret rooms behind false walls, blueprints hidden in specially designed containers, projects that could change the world but were too dangerous for the wrong hands. At 8, Jack had hung on every word. At 18, he'd dismissed them as an old man's imagination. At 62, standing in that lawyer's office with his brother's laughter echoing around him, he wondered if there might have been more truth in those stories than anyone realized. The photograph had settled the matter for Jack. Tucked inside, the deed envelope was a faded black-and-white image from what looked like the early 1950s. Victor Mercer stood in the center of 5 men, all wearing work clothes and serious expressions. They posed in front of what was unmistakably the warehouse, though it looked newer then, with fresh paint and clear windows. On the back, in Victor's careful handwriting, the team that changed everything. For Jack, when he's ready. Sarah had driven up from Boston the weekend after the will reading, her BMW looking out of place on Elm Street's potholed asphalt. She'd studied the photograph over coffee in Jack's kitchen, her expression the same one she'd worn as a teenager when he'd tried to explain how carburetors worked. "Dad, come on." Grandpa was a sweet old man, but he had a tendency to embellish. You know that. She'd set the photo down gently, the way she might handle a child's drawing. "This warehouse has been abandoned for 30 years. The neighborhood's completely dead. Even if there was something valuable there once, it's long gone." By now, Michael had been even more blunt during their Sunday call. "Why are you even considering this, Dad? It's going to cost more to tear down than it's worth. Just sell it to some developer for whatever you can get and use the money to fix up the shop. Or better yet, close the shop and move somewhere with better healthcare." But Jack had made his decision. On a grey Tuesday morning in early October, he'd driven his pickup truck through the winding streets of Millbrook's industrial district, past the shuttered factories and overgrown lots, until he reached the warehouse that now legally belonged to him. The building sat on a corner lot, 3 stories of red brick, darkened by decades of weather and neglect. Vines had claimed most of the eastern wall, their brown tendrils creeping through broken mortar joints. The loading dock doors were secured with rusted chains, and most of the windows on the first 2 floors had been boarded over with plywood that had warped and split with age. But it was larger than Jack remembered, easily 10,000 square feet, and the structure itself appeared sound. The roof showed no obvious signs of collapse, and the foundation looked solid despite the weeds growing up around it. Someone had built this place to last. More intriguingly, the building wasn't completely dark. While most of the structure sat, empty and still, 1 window on the 3rd floor, a small square pane near what would have been the office area, glowed with a soft, warm light. Not the harsh, fluorescent glare of modern bulbs, but something gentler, more like lamplight or candle flame. Jack had sat in his truck for 20 minutes that first day, studying that mysterious glow and turning his grandfather's keys over in his. In palm, they were old-fashioned skeleton keys, the kind that opened everything in buildings from that era. 3 of them on a ring that had once been silver, but now showed the dull patina of age. His grandfather had carried these keys in his pocket every day, according to Jack's father. Even after he'd stopped going to the warehouse, Victor had kept them close. The neighborhood around the building told its own story of decline. The machine shop across the street had closed in the 1990s, its windows now painted over. A small diner on the next corner had been gutted by fire years ago, leaving only a skeleton of concrete blocks and twisted metal. The only signs of recent activity came from the homeless camp that had sprung up in the vacant lot behind the old textile mill, where a few hardy souls had constructed shelters from tarps and shopping carts. This was where Jack's inheritance lay, in the middle of a forgotten district, in a building that everyone assumed was worthless, surrounded by the ruins of better times. His family thought he was foolish for even considering it valuable. His friends at the auto parts store had laughed when he'd mentioned the inheritance, joking about how he'd probably find nothing but pigeon droppings and old machinery. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were all missing something important. His grandfather had been many things: secretive, stubborn, sometimes frustrating in his refusal to explain his past. but he'd never been a fool. And that photograph, with its inscription about being ready, suggested Victor had been preparing for this moment long before his death. Standing there in the October chill, keys in hand, and that mysterious light calling to him from the third floor, Jack made a decision that would have surprised his pragmatic brothers and worried children. He was going to find out what Victor Mercer had really been hiding all these years. The first key fit the front door lock perfectly. The door opened with surprising ease, its hinges well oiled despite decades of apparent abandonment. Jack stepped into darkness that smelled not of decay and mold, as he'd expected, but of machine oil and something else. A faint electrical scent, like the air after a lightning storm. His flashlight beam revealed a reception area that time had left remarkably untouched. A heavy wooden desk sat beneath a layer of dust, its surface clear except for an old rotary telephone and a desk blotter still positioned as if someone had just stepped away for lunch. The walls were paneled in dark wood, and framed certificates hung in neat rows. Though their text was too faded to read in the dim light, Jack moved deeper into the building, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The main floor opened into a vast workspace, filled with machinery he couldn't immediately identify. Unlike the abandoned factories he'd seen around town, this equipment hadn't been stripped for scrap metal. Heavy lathes and milling machines stood in organized rows, their surfaces protected by canvas covers that showed only light dust accumulation. Someone had taken care to preserve this place, but it was the sound that stopped him in his tracks. A low, almost inaudible hum coming from somewhere above. Jack aimed his flashlight at the ceiling and saw that the building's electrical system was apparently still active. Conduits ran in neat lines across the exposed beams, and several junction boxes showed small indicator lights glowing green. He found the staircase to the second floor behind a partition wall. The steps were solid oak, worn smooth by decades of use, and they barely creaked under his weight. The second floor housed what appeared to be offices and smaller workshop spaces. Drafting tables lined the windows, their surfaces covered with protective cloth. Filing cabinets stood in perfect rows, their drawers labeled with codes that meant nothing to Jack but suggested careful organization. The humming sound grew stronger as he climbed to the third floor. Here the layout was different, more intimate, with smaller rooms that felt like private studies rather than industrial workspace. And here, finally, Jack found the source of that mysterious glow he'd seen from the street. The back office was illuminated by a series of glass tubes mounted along the walls, each one filled with a substance that gave off a soft, steady light. Jack had never seen anything like it. The illumination was warm and pleasant, more like natural sunlight than artificial lighting. The tubes appeared to be connected to some kind of power source, but Jack could see no obvious wiring or electrical connections. But it was the wall itself that made Jack's heart race. What had appeared to be solid paneling at first glance revealed itself, under closer inspection, to be something more complex. The wood grain didn't quite match between sections, and there were subtle variations in color that suggested some panels might be removable. Jack ran his hand along the wall, feeling for irregularities. His fingers found what felt like a small depression in the wood, about the size and shape of a handprint. Without conscious thought, he pressed his palm against the spot. The panel slid aside with a whisper-quiet mechanical motion, revealing a hidden space beyond. Jack's flashlight illuminated a room that belonged to another era entirely. The walls were covered with blueprints and technical drawings, held in place by magnetic strips that still functioned perfectly. A large desk dominated the center of the space, its surface covered with papers, tools, and what appeared to be electronic equipment from the 1940s or 1950s. Everything was precisely organized, as if the room's occupant had stepped out moments ago rather than decades. But it was the photographs covering one entire wall that brought tears to Jack's eyes. Dozens of images showing Victor Mercer at different ages, working alongside various colleagues. In some photos, he was bent over technical drawings. In others, he stood proudly beside completed projects, and in several, he was holding a young boy who Jack recognized as his own father. At the center of this photographic timeline was a larger image that made Jack's breath catch. Victor Mercer and 4 other men stood in what was clearly this very room, all of them wearing expressions of triumph and exhaustion. Behind them, barely visible in the photograph's background, was a large piece of equipment covered by a canvas tarp. On the bottom of the photo, in Victor's careful handwriting, Project Aurora completed, November 1951. The future begins here. Jack sank into the chair behind the desk, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't the lair of an eccentric old man spinning fantastical tales. This was a fully functional workspace, maintained in perfect condition, waiting for someone who knew where to look. A leather-bound notebook lay open on the desk, its pages filled with Victor's distinctive handwriting. The entry visible was dated December 1951. The prototype exceeded all expectations. Clean energy output at 300% efficiency compared to conventional methods, but the political climate grows dangerous. Senator McCarthy's committee shows interest in our project, and certain industrial interests have made their position clear. We must protect Aurora until the world is ready. Jack turned the page and found an entry from January 1952. They came. Today, government men in dark suits, demanding we turn over all research materials. I told them the project was terminated, all materials destroyed. They seem to believe me, but I know they'll be watching. Aurora must remain hidden until someone with the right heart can continue the work. I pray that person will be family. Someone who understands that some discoveries belong to all humanity, not just those with power. The final entry was dated March 1952. I leave tonight. The warehouse will appear abandoned, but the systems will continue. The key is in the family bloodline, literally. The biometric scanner will respond only to Mercer DNA, and only when the heart is right. Jack is too young now, but someday he will find this place. Someday he will understand why I had to disappear. The light that never goes out will guide him. Home. Jack stared at the page, his grandfather's words echoing in his memory. A light that never goes out. Victor hadn't been speaking metaphorically. He'd been talking about those glowing tubes powered by whatever technology he'd developed and hidden away. The sound of footsteps on the stairs below made Jack freeze. He hadn't heard a car arrive, hadn't heard the front door open, but someone was definitely in the building. The footsteps were careful, deliberate, moving slowly through the first floor, as if the person was conducting a systematic search. Jack quickly closed the notebook and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He moved to the hidden room's entrance and carefully slid the panel back into place, then positioned himself where he could watch the staircase while remaining concealed. The footsteps reached the second floor, paused for several minutes, then continued upward. Jack held his breath as a figure appeared at the top of the stairs. A woman in her 60s, dressed in practical clothing, carrying a small flashlight. She moved with the confidence of someone familiar with the building's layout. "Hello, Jack," she said softly, not looking in his direction but clearly aware of his presence. "I wondered when you'd finally find your way here." Jack stepped into view, his hand instinctively moving to the keys in his pocket. "Who are you? How did you know I was here?" The woman turned toward him, and in the light from those mysterious tubes, Jack could see a face marked by intelligence and kindness, framed by silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her eyes held the same depth of knowledge he remembered. In his grandfather's gaze, "My name is Elena Rodriguez," she said. "I was your grandfather's research partner, and I've been waiting 30 years for you to inherit this place." Elena Rodriguez had the steady hands of someone who'd spent decades working with delicate instruments, and the careful way she handled the rolled blueprints suggested they were more precious than gold. Jack watched her spread them across Victor's desk, weighing down the corners with small instruments he didn't recognize. Your grandfather was a genius, Jack. Not the mad scientist kind you see in movies, but the real thing. Someone who could see connections that eluded everyone else. Elena's voice carried a slight accent that Jack couldn't place, and her movements had the precision of a trained engineer. These blueprints represent 15 years of research, from 1937 to 1952. The drawings were unlike anything Jack had ever seen. While he could recognize basic mechanical elements, gears, housings, electrical connections, the overall design seemed to follow principles he didn't understand. The central component appeared to be some kind of spherical chamber surrounded by intricate coil arrangements. Handwritten notes filled the margins in multiple languages, with calculations that stretched across several pages. "What exactly am I looking at?" Jack asked, leaning closer to study the fine detail work. Elena pointed to the central sphere. "Clean energy generation based on principles that mainstream science wouldn't accept for another 70 years. Your grandfather was exploring what we now call quantum field manipulation, though he used different terminology. He called it tapping the universal current." Jack felt a familiar skepticism rising. It was the same feeling he'd had as a teenager when Victor had tried to explain his work, using words that sounded like science fiction. "Elena, I appreciate whatever relationship you had with my grandfather, but this looks like fantasy." Elena's smile was patient. "I understand your doubt. I had the same reaction when Victor first showed me his theories in 1948. I was 26 then, fresh out of MIT with a degree in electrical engineering, convinced I understood how the world worked." She traced one of the coil diagrams with her finger. "It took me 3 months of working with him to realize that conventional science was missing something fundamental." She moved to another section of the blueprint, showing what appeared to be a complex monitoring system. The breakthrough came when Victor realized that certain crystalline structures could amplify and focus quantum field fluctuations, not create energy from nothing, that would violate thermodynamics, but tap into the constant energy exchange happening at the subatomic level. Jack studied Elena's face, looking for signs of delusion or deception. Instead, he saw the calm confidence of someone stating simple facts. If this technology really worked, why isn't it powering the world today? Because in 1951, certain people decided it was too dangerous. Elena's expression darkened. Not the technology itself, but what it represented. Free, clean energy would have disrupted entire industries. Oil companies, utility companies, coal mining operations, trillions of dollars in investments that would become worthless overnight. She pulled out a folder Jack hadn't noticed, containing newspaper clippings and official documents. Your grandfather wasn't just a lone inventor. He was part of a government research program called Project Prometheus, designed to develop alternative energy sources for military applications. But when the implications became clear, the project was classified and then officially terminated. The newspaper clippings were from 1952, describing the mysterious disappearance of several scientists working on classified projects. Victor Mercer was mentioned in one article as a foreign-born researcher who failed to report for work and is presumed to have returned to his country of origin. "He didn't go back to Czechoslovakia," Jack said, understanding beginning to dawn. "No, he went underground, literally and figuratively. The warehouse became his sanctuary, and he spent the rest of his life perfecting the technology while waiting for the right moment to reveal it." Elena carefully rolled up the blueprints. He believed that moment would come when someone in his family inherited both the knowledge and the moral courage to use it responsibly. Jack pulled Victor's notebook from his jacket pocket. He wrote about a biometric scanner, said it would only work for someone with Mercer DNA when the heart is right. What did he mean? Elena's eyes lit up with recognition. "You found Victor's journal. Good, that means you've accessed the hidden office." She gestured toward the wall panel. The scanner was Victor's failsafe. He programmed it to respond not just to genetic markers, but to biometric indicators of stress, fear, and intention. Someone trying to access the technology for selfish or harmful purposes would trigger different responses than someone approaching with genuine curiosity and good intentions. That sounds like something from a spy novel. Victor was always ahead of his time, even with security measures. Elena moved to what appeared to be a blank section of wall and pressed her hand against it. A different panel slid away, revealing a small alcove containing what looked like a more modern computer terminal. He spent 20 years refining the systems. The technology that powers this building is the same clean energy source described in those blueprints. It's been running continuously since 1952. Jack felt a chill as the implications sank in. The glowing tubes are powered by the prototype. Your grandfather built a working model and used it to keep this place operational while he waited. Elena's fingers moved over the terminal's keyboard with practiced familiarity. The system monitors itself, maintains optimal temperature and humidity, and has been protecting the research materials for 3 decades. The terminal screen showed a series of status displays that looked remarkably advanced for technology from the 1950s. Power output was steady at what appeared to be 100% efficiency, with no indication of fuel consumption or waste production. Elena, how long have you been coming here? Every few months since Victor disappeared, he asked me to watch over the place to make sure the systems stayed operational. She turned from the terminal to face Jack directly. And to be here when the right person finally inherited the keys. Jack sank into Victor's chair, his mind reeling. My family thinks this place is worthless. My brothers want me to sell it for scrap metal. My kids think I'm having some kind of midlife crisis. What do you think? The question hung in the air between them. Jack looked around the hidden office, taking in the photographs of his grandfather, the precisely maintained equipment, the blueprint, rolls that represented decades of revolutionary research. Everything Elena had shown him suggested that Victor Mercer had been far more than the eccentric old man Jack remembered. I think, Jack said slowly, that I've been underestimating my grandfather my entire life. Elena nodded approvingly. That's the first step toward understanding what you've truly inherited. She moved to another section of the wall, revealing a collection of files and documents. These contain the complete research records, including successful test results and scalability projections. Victor wasn't just building a curiosity, he was developing technology that could transform how humanity generates and uses energy. Jack stood up and walked to the window overlooking the abandoned industrial district. If this is real, if the technology actually works, then why haven't I heard about anyone else developing similar systems? Because, Elena said quietly, the forces that buried Victor's research are still active today. The same corporate interests that shut down Project Prometheus have only grown more powerful in the last 70 years. She joined him at the window. Your grandfather understood that timing would be crucial. Release the technology too early, and it gets suppressed again. Wait too long, and environmental damage becomes irreversible. And you think now is the right time. Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Jack's reflection in the window glass. I think, she said finally, that depends entirely on you. The journal Elena handed Jack was bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age, but perfectly preserved. Victor's handwriting filled every page in his characteristic careful script, alternating between English and what Jack assumed was Czech, when his grandfather's emotions had run too high for his adopted language. Start with the entry from August 1950, Elena suggested, settling into a chair across from Victor's desk. That's when he first realized the full implications of what he'd discovered. Jack found the date and began reading aloud. The prototype achieved sustained operation today. 12 hours of continuous energy output with no fuel consumption, no waste products, no environmental impact. Elena calculated the efficiency at 340% compared to coal-fired generation. We have proven that clean, unlimited energy is not only possible, but practical. He looked up at Elena. 340% efficiency. That's impossible. According to everything I know about physics. Your grandfather wasn't breaking the laws of physics, Elena explained. He was working with laws that mainstream science hadn't discovered yet. The energy isn't being created from nothing. It's being harvested from quantum field fluctuations that exist everywhere in the universe. Jack continued reading. But I am troubled by today's meeting with Colonel Harrison. His questions focused not on the technology's peaceful applications, but on its potential for weapons development. When I explained that the field manipulation principles could theoretically be scaled up to disrupt enemy power grids, his enthusiasm was disturbing. This was not why Elena and I began this work. The next entry was dated a week later. Elena agrees with my concerns. We have created something that could transform human civilization for the better, but in the wrong hands, it could become a tool of oppression. The Colonel speaks of American energy independence and technological superiority, but I hear echoes of the rhetoric that destroyed my homeland. Power corrupts, regardless of nationality. Jack turned the page and found a longer entry from September 1950. The political situation grows more complex daily. Senator McCarthy's witch hunt for communist sympathizers has reached our research facility. 3 scientists have been dismissed on suspicion of foreign influence. The irony is bitter. I fled communist tyranny in Czechoslovakia, only to find similar paranoia taking root in America. But here, the paranoia serves corporate interests, rather than political ideology. Elena leaned forward. That was when Victor began to understand the true opposition to his work. It wasn't just government bureaucracy or scientific skepticism. It was deliberate suppression by industries that would lose fortunes if clean energy became freely available. Jack found an entry from December 1950 that made his stomach tighten. Today, I received an unofficial visit from representatives of Standard Oil and General Electric. They offered to purchase all our research for a sum that would make Elena and me wealthy for life. When I declined and asked about their intentions for the technology, their spokesman, a cold man named Pemberton, explained that some discoveries are too disruptive for immediate implementation. They suggested a timeline of 50 to 70 years before market conditions would be suitable for clean energy alternatives. 50 to 70 years, Jack repeated. That would put us right around now. Your grandfather was a better prophet than he knew, Elena said grimly. But he also understood that corporate timetables don't account for environmental necessity. The journal entries grew darker as 1951 progressed. Victor documented increasing pressure from government officials, mysterious break-ins at his home, and surveillance that made normal life impossible. But it was the entry from November 1951 that revealed the full scope of his predicament. They have made their position clear through actions rather than words. Dr. Morrison, who worked on parallel research at Berkeley, was found dead in his laboratory last week. Officially ruled an accident, a gas leak, but Morrison was the most safety-conscious researcher I ever knew. Dr. Chen, who had achieved similar breakthroughs at Chicago, died in a car accident 3 days ago. The message is unmistakable. Cease the work or face the consequences. Jack's hands shook slightly as he turned to the next page. Elena, this suggests that people were killed to suppress the technology. Your grandfather believed that absolutely, Elena replied. Whether through accidents that were too convenient, sudden illnesses that struck only clean energy researchers, or career destruction that left brilliant scientists unemployable, the pattern was clear to anyone paying attention. The final entries chronicled Victor's decision to disappear. I cannot continue the work openly without putting Elena and others at risk. But neither can I allow this knowledge to die with me. The solution is to preserve everything in the warehouse and wait for A time when the world is ready to embrace change. My son is too young, too trusting of authority. But perhaps his son will inherit both the curiosity to find this place and the wisdom to use what he discovers responsibly. Jack closed the journal and sat in silence for several minutes. The office around him, the photographs, the preserved equipment, the still functioning technology, suddenly felt less like a museum and more like a tomb. His grandfather hadn't been hiding from shame or failure, but from forces powerful enough to kill him for his discoveries. "How do I know you're telling me the truth?" Jack asked finally. "How do I know this isn't some elaborate fantasy you've created?" Elena stood up and moved to the computer terminal because the technology is still working 30 years after Victor disappeared. She brought up a new display showing power consumption data. This building has been drawing zero energy from the municipal grid since 1952. All heating, lighting, and equipment power comes from the prototype system. The electric company has no record of this address because it's been completely energy independent. For 7 decades, she pulled up another screen showing environmental data. The system also purifies the air within a 3-block radius. Particulate pollution levels around this building are consistently lower than the surrounding area. Victor designed it to be beneficial to the environment rather than extractive. Jack studied the data, his mechanic's practical mind wrestling with implications that seemed impossible. If this is real, if the technology actually works the way you're describing, then why hasn't someone else figured it out? Why aren't there clean energy systems everywhere? Because, Elena said quietly, the same forces that buried Victor's research are still active today. Oil companies spend millions annually on lobbying against clean energy alternatives. Utility. Companies fight legislation that would encourage distributed power generation. The entire economic system is built around scarcity and control of energy resources. She brought up a news article on the terminal screen, dated just 2 months earlier. Look at this headline. Promising clean energy startup acquired by ExxonMobil. Technology to be shelved indefinitely. It's the same pattern Victor documented 70 years ago, repeated over and over. Jack stood and walked to the wall of photographs showing Victor with his research team. The faces looked young and hopeful, unaware of the forces that would soon scatter them. What happened to the other people in these pictures? Morrison and Chen died in 1951. Dr. Kowalski moved back to Poland and never published again. Dr. Petrov got a job teaching high school physics in Montana and kept his head down until retirement. Elena's voice carried old grief. Only Victor had the resources and determination to preserve the work. And you? Elena smiled sadly. I spent 40 years as a research librarian at the university, quietly documenting suppressed technologies and watching the pattern repeat itself. Solar panel efficiency breakthroughs that disappeared into patent portfolios. Battery technologies that could revolutionize energy storage, bought up by companies that never brought them to market. Your grandfather's story isn't unique, it's systematic. Jack returned to the desk and picked up Victor's journal again. He wrote that the system would only activate for family members when the heart is right. What happens if my heart isn't right? Then nothing happens, Elena replied simply. The technology remains dormant. The warehouse appears to be just another abandoned building, and eventually the whole thing crumbles into dust. She paused, studying Jack's face. But I don't think that's what your grandfather saw in you. How could he see anything in me? I was 8 years old when he disappeared. Elena moved to the photograph wall and pointed to a picture Jack hadn't noticed before. It showed Victor kneeling beside a young boy who was clearly Jack, both of them examining some kind of mechanical device. He saw someone who asked questions instead of accepting easy answers. Someone who wasn't satisfied with surface explanations. She turned back to Jack. Someone who would drive across town to explore. A building everyone else called worthless. Jack stared at the photograph, remembering that day dimly. Victor had been showing him how gears worked, how simple machines could amplify human effort. But more than the mechanical lesson, Jack remembered his grandfather's patience, his willingness to answer every question, no matter how childish or repetitive. "What am I supposed to do with all this?" Jack asked. "Even if everything you're telling me is true, I'm just a small-town mechanic. I don't have the resources or connections to fight oil companies and government agencies." Elena smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Your grandfather didn't start with resources or connections either. He started with curiosity, determination, and a belief that some things are more important than personal safety." She gestured around the preserved office. "Everything you need is right here. The question is whether you're ready to use it." The prototype was hidden beneath the warehouse floor, accessed through a concealed elevator that descended 2 levels underground. Jack followed Elena down a corridor lined with the same softly glowing tubes that had illuminated the office above, his heart pounding with anticipation and disbelief. "Victor built this level in 1949, Elena explained as they walked. "He knew from the beginning that the most important work would need to be protected from prying eyes." She stopped before a heavy door marked with radiation symbols and biohazard warnings. "Don't worry about those. Victor posted them to discourage casual visitors. The technology is completely safe." The door opened to reveal a chamber that took Jack's breath away. At the center of the room sat a device that looked like something from a science fiction movie, yet clearly belonged to the engineering aesthetic of the 1940s. The core was a sphere about the size of a basketball, supported by an intricate framework of copper coils and crystalline structures that caught and refracted light in mesmerizing patterns. But it was the fact that the device was obviously active that made Jack's knees weak. The sphere pulsed with a gentle inner light, and the crystals around it hummed with barely audible harmonic tones. Displays along the walls showed steady power output readings, and the air itself felt charged with potential energy. "My God," Jack whispered. "It's really working." Elena moved to a control panel that looked surprisingly modern despite its age. Continuous operation for 73 years, 2 months, and 16 days. No maintenance required, no fuel consumed, no waste products generated. She brought up a series of monitors showing energy flow patterns. Current output is approximately 12 kilowatts, enough to power this entire building plus several neighboring blocks. Jack approached the device slowly, feeling a strange resonance in his chest, as if his heartbeat was synchronizing with the prototype's pulse. How is this possible? How can it generate energy indefinitely? It's not generating energy, it's harvesting it. Elena pulled out a tablet and showed Jack a complex diagram. At the quantum level, space itself is alive with constant energy fluctuations, virtual particles appearing and disappearing, fields oscillating in ways that conventional physics can measure but not harness. Victor's breakthrough was discovering how to tap into that underlying structure. Jack studied the diagram, his mechanic's intuition helping him understand the basic principles even when the physics went over his head. "So it's like a water wheel in an invisible stream." That's actually a very good analogy. The stream is the quantum vacuum, and Victor's device is designed to extract usable energy from its fluctuations without disrupting the underlying system. Elena pointed to the crystalline structures around the sphere. "These are the key component. Artificial crystals grown according to specifications Victor developed over 15 years. They resonate with quantum field variations and amplify them into usable electrical current." Jack noticed that several instruments around the room were displaying data in real time. "Are you still monitoring the system?" "Every day for 30 years. I'm probably the only person alive who understands how to maintain and repair Victor's technology." Elena's expression grew serious. "Which brings up an important point. This knowledge dies with me, unless we find a way to pass it on." The weight of responsibility settled on Jack's shoulders like a heavy coat. Why hasn't anyone else discovered this independently? If Victor could figure it out in the 1940s, why aren't there universities full of researchers working on similar Projects. Elena led Jack to another display showing patent records. Because the fundamental research has been systematically suppressed for decades. Look at these filing patterns. Every time someone approaches a breakthrough in quantum energy harvesting, their patent applications are either rejected on spurious grounds or classified as national security secrets. The screen showed dozens of patent applications from the 1950s through present day, all dealing with variations on Victor's basic principles. Each one was marked either denied or classified national security. The system is designed to prevent exactly this kind of breakthrough, Elena continued. Any research that threatens established energy interests gets buried in bureaucracy or dismissed as pseudoscience. She pulled up another file. Victor predicted this in his journal. He wrote that the technology would remain hidden until someone approached it from outside the academic and corporate systems. Jack was studying the prototype's control systems when alarms began sounding. Throughout the building, Elena rushed to her tablet, her fingers flying over the interface. What's happening? Motion sensors on the upper floors. Someone's in the building. Elena's face had gone pale. Jack, did you tell anyone you were coming here today? No. I took a personal day from the shop and didn't mention where I was going. Jack felt a chill of fear. Could it be someone from my family? Elena was monitoring camera feeds from throughout the warehouse. 3 men in business suits, moving systematically through the building. They're not family members, Jack. They're professionals. She pointed to the screen. Look at how they're moving, how they're examining the equipment. These are people who know what they're looking for. On the monitor, Jack watched the 3 men spreading through the building with military precision. One was photographing everything. With a high-end camera, another was using some kind of scanning device on the walls and machinery, and the third appeared to be in charge, speaking quietly into a headset. How did they find us? Jack asked. Elena was shutting down displays and securing equipment with practiced efficiency. Someone's been watching you, monitoring your visits here. Or, she stopped abruptly, a look of realization crossing her face. Jack, have you discussed the inheritance with anyone outside your immediate family? Just the lawyer who read the will, and he's been handling my family's legal matters for 20 years. Jack watched the intruders on screen, noting how professionally they worked. Elena, who are these people? Corporate security, most likely. The same kinds of people who visited Victor in 1951. Elena activated what appeared to be a lockdown system. Heavy barriers slid across the chamber entrances, and several monitoring systems switched to emergency backup power. Your grandfather designed this place to be secure, but he couldn't account for modern surveillance technology. The lead intruder on screen was now examining the third-floor office, where Jack had first discovered Victor's hidden room. Even through the security camera's grainy image, Jack could see the man's systematic approach. He wasn't searching randomly, but following specific protocols as if he knew exactly what he was looking for. They're going to find the hidden panels, Elena said grimly. Victor's biometric locks will keep them out of the most sensitive areas, but they'll know the technology exists. Jack felt a surge of protective anger. This was his inheritance, his family's legacy, and strangers were violating it with the casual efficiency of people who considered themselves entitled to anything they wanted. Is there another way out of here? Elena nodded toward a section of wall that looked solid but was apparently another concealed door. Emergency exit that leads to the old steam tunnels beneath the district. Victor connected to the city's abandoned underground infrastructure when he built this level. I'm not running away, Jack said firmly. This is my property, and I want to know who these people are and what they want. Elena studied his face, perhaps seeing something in his expression that reminded her of Victor. Your grandfather would have said the same thing. But Jack, these aren't people you can reason with or intimidate. If they're here, it means someone, very powerful, has decided your inheritance is too dangerous to ignore. On the monitor, the intruders had found the hidden office and were examining Victor's desk and filing cabinets. The lead man was speaking into his headset with obvious satisfaction. They'd found what they were looking for. "What happens now?" Jack asked. Elena was packing essential files and data storage devices into a briefcase. "Now, we disappear, the same way Victor did. We take the critical information and find somewhere safe to continue the work." She paused, looking around the chamber that had been her life's work for 3 decades. "Unless you're ready to fight for what your grandfather built." Jack looked from Elena to the functioning prototype to the monitors showing Intruders systematically cataloguing his family's secrets. The choice his grandfather had faced, surrender the technology or resist, was now his to make. But unlike Victor, Jack wasn't alone. The legal documents were stored in a fireproof safe, hidden behind another false wall, and as Elena spread them across the underground chamber's work table, Jack realized his grandfather had been far more thorough than anyone imagined. The portfolio contained not just patents and research notes, but contracts, correspondence, and official government agreements that painted a picture of systematic betrayal. "These are the original patent and trademark office filings," Elena explained, pointing to documents marked with official seals. Victor filed applications for 17 different innovations between 1948 and 1951. Look at the approval dates. Every single one was granted, which means the technology was officially recognized as legitimate and groundbreaking. Jack studied the patent documents, noting his grandfather's careful technical drawings and detailed explanations. But if these were approved, why isn't the technology in use today? Elena turned to a thick folder marked Correspondence Confidential. "Because someone changed the rules after the fact. Look at this letter from the Patent Office dated December 1951. Due to national security concerns, patents 2,147,963 through 2,147,979 are hereby classified under the Inventions Secrecy Act. Public disclosure of these technologies is prohibited indefinitely." Jack read the official letterhead with growing anger. They waited until he'd proven the technology. Worked, then seized it? It gets worse. Elena pulled out a series of contracts bearing corporate letterheads. "Your grandfather was approached by representatives from Standard Oil, General Electric, and Westinghouse in late 1951. They offered to purchase his patents for what seemed like generous terms until you read the fine print." The contract language was dense with legal terminology, but Elena highlighted the key sections. The corporations weren't offering to buy Victor's technology to develop it. They were offering to buy it to ensure it never saw commercial application. Clauses buried deep in the agreement specified that the patents would be held in strategic reserve for an indefinite period. "Strategic reserve," Jack read aloud. "What does that mean?" "It means locked away forever," Elena replied bitterly. "Victor was offered millions to hand over technology that could have transformed human civilization, on the condition that it would never be used." She pulled out Victor's handwritten response. "Never sent. I did not flee tyranny in Europe to enable a different kind of oppression in America. Some discoveries belong to all humanity." Jack found himself studying a photograph tucked between the contracts, Victor and Elena working together in the prototype chamber, both looking decades younger and filled with the enthusiasm of people changing the world. "Why didn't you two just publish everything, make the knowledge public so it couldn't be suppressed?" "We tried." Elena's voice carried old frustration. "Look at these rejection letters from Scientific American, Nature, Physical Review, every major scientific publication. The editors claimed our results were too extraordinary to be credible and demanded peer review from experts who had obvious conflicts of interest. The rejection letters were brutal in their dismissal." One editor wrote, "While the author's experimental methodology appears sound, the claimed energy output levels violate established thermodynamic principles. We suggest the authors recalibrate their instruments and reconsider their conclusions." Another simply stated, "This journal does not publish speculative fiction masquerading as scientific research." They couldn't disprove the results. Elena continued, "So they attacked the credibility of anyone who supported them. Professor Williams at Harvard was stripped of tenure for defending our work. Dr. Martinez at Caltech lost his research funding for attempting to replicate our experiments. Jack was studying a thick folder labeled Modern Applications when the building's alarm system activated again. Elena rushed to the monitors, but instead of showing intruders on the upper floors, the screens displayed something more concerning: official vehicles surrounding the warehouse. Jack, we have a problem. Those aren't corporate security people. Upstairs, they're federal agents, and they've brought backup. Through the security cameras, Jack watched black SUVs positioning themselves at every exit from the building. Men in dark suits were setting up some kind of perimeter, and one was speaking into a bullhorn, though the sound didn't carry to the underground chamber. Elena was frantically copying files to portable drives. "This is exactly what happened to Victor. Someone leaked information about your inheritance, and now they're moving to secure the site before you can understand what you found. Who could have leaked it? I haven't told anyone except—" Jack stopped, remembering his family's persistent questions about the warehouse, their pressure to sell it quickly. "Elena, what if someone in my family is involved?" Elena paused in her copying. Victor worried about that possibility. He believed the pressure to suppress clean energy technology would eventually corrupt people at every level, including families of the original researchers. She pulled out a folder Jack hadn't seen before. "These are financial records he compiled, tracking payments made to relatives of other scientists who worked on similar projects." The records showed a disturbing pattern. Family members of researchers who had developed competing technologies had received substantial payments from shell corporations linked to energy companies, payments that coincided with their public dismissal of their relatives' work as fantasy or fraud. "You're saying energy companies pay people to betray their own families. I'm saying they pay people to protect what they see as their legitimate business interests." Elena's tablet chimed with an alert from the building's external sensors. "Jack, they're bringing in drilling equipment. They're not here to confiscate the technology. They're here to destroy it." On the monitor, Jack watched crews unloading industrial equipment that looked capable of demolishing the entire building. This wasn't a government seizure or corporate acquisition. It was systematic destruction designed to ensure Victor's technology could never threaten established interests. "How long do we have?" Elena was checking the chamber's security systems. "The underground levels are designed to withstand significant structural damage, but if they bring in enough explosives, even Victor's precautions won't be sufficient." She looked at Jack with desperate determination. "There's something I haven't told you. The prototype down here isn't the only one Victor built." Jack felt his world shift again. "What do you mean? Your grandfather was too smart to put all his faith in one location. He built 3 functioning prototypes and hid them in different places, connected by quantum entanglement principles that allow them to share power and information." Elena pulled up a map on her tablet, showing locations across 3 states. 1. Here in the warehouse, 1 in a facility he built beneath his old house in Pennsylvania, and 1 in a remote location in West Virginia. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because activating the network requires all 3 prototypes to be operated simultaneously by people Victor trusted completely. I can handle 1 location, but we need at least 2 more people with the right genetic markers and moral commitment." Elena met Jack's eyes. "We need your family, Jack, the ones who aren't compromised by corporate influence." The sound of drilling equipment starting up echoed through the building structure. Jack realized he was facing the same choice that had driven his grandfather into hiding, but with much higher stakes. The technology that could revolutionize human civilization was about to be destroyed unless he could convince his skeptical family to help preserve it. "Elena, if I contact my children now, how do I know they won't just think I've lost my mind?" Elena handed him a small device that looked like a modified smartphone. Because this will show them the prototype network in real time. They'll be able to see the energy output, the environmental benefits, and the potential for global transformation. She paused as another burst of drilling vibrated through the chamber. But, Jack, once we activate the full network, there's no hiding anymore. We'll be committed to either success or destruction. Jack looked around the chamber his grandfather had built, at the technology that had run continuously for over 70 years, at the woman who had spent 3 decades protecting a dream of clean, free energy for all humanity. Above them, corporate and government forces were preparing to bury that dream forever. But unlike his grandfather, Jack had options Victor never had. He had the complete technical documentation, he had Elena's decades of expertise, and he had family members who might, just might, be willing to listen if he could prove his grandfather hadn't been the eccentric dreamer they'd always believed. The choice was no longer between hiding and revelation. It was between surrender and war. The government classification files Elena pulled from the final hidden safe changed everything Jack thought he knew about his grandfather's story. The Manila folder was marked Project Prometheus, declassified 2020, and contained documents that had been sealed for nearly 7 decades. "Jack, sit down before you read these," Elena said quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the folder. "What I told you about your grandfather was true, but it wasn't the whole truth." The first document was a memorandum dated October 15, 1951, from the Office of Strategic Services to the Secretary of Defense. Project Prometheus has achieved complete success. Dr. Victor Mercer and his team have developed functional clean energy technology with potential military applications. However, civilian deployment would destabilize multiple strategic industries critical to national security. Recommend immediate classification and containment. Jack felt his stomach drop. Containment? What does that mean? Elena turned to the next document, a detailed report on economic impact analysis. The projections were staggering. Widespread adoption of Victor's technology would eliminate the need for coal mining, significantly reduce oil consumption, and make large portions of the electrical grid obsolete. The economic disruption would affect millions of jobs and trillions of dollars in corporate assets. Your government didn't classify the technology to protect national security, Elena said bitterly. They classified it to protect national economic interests. The same politicians who took campaign contributions from oil companies decided that clean energy was too dangerous for democracy. But it was the third document that shattered Jack's understanding of the past 30 years. It was a surveillance report dated just 2 weeks earlier, detailing his visits to the warehouse and identifying Elena as person of interest number 1 in ongoing investigation of stolen classified materials. "Elena, they've been watching us since my first visit." Elena's face had gone pale. "Jack, there's something else. Something I should have told you from the beginning." She pulled out a credential wallet that had been hidden in the bottom of the safe. The ID inside identified Dr. Elena Rodriguez as a retired agent of the Central Intelligence Agency. Jack stared at the ID, his mind reeling. "Your CIA?" "Was. From 1963 to 1998. Elena met his eyes with obvious pain. "I was assigned to monitor Victor's technology and ensure it remained secure. I was 23 when they sent me to befriend him, to gain his trust and report on his activities." The revelation hit Jack like a physical blow. "You were spying on him?" "Initially, yes. My job was to infiltrate his research and document everything he was doing." Elena's voice cracked with emotion. "But Jack, your grandfather was the most decent man I'd ever met. He genuinely believed his technology could save the world, and he was right. After 6 months of working with him, I realized I was on the wrong side. Jack stood up and paced the chamber, trying to process the implications. So when you helped him disappear, I violated direct orders and betrayed my own agency. The CIA wanted to arrest Victor and seize all his research. Instead, I helped him fake his death and disappear into the underground network he'd prepared. Elena pulled out another document from the classified files. This is my termination report. Officially, I was dismissed for failure to maintain operational security. Unofficially, they couldn't prove I'd helped Victor escape. The termination report painted Elena as a failed agent who had been compromised by emotional attachment to the subject. But reading between the lines, Jack could see that she had actually outsmarted her handlers and protected Victor when it mattered most. For 30 years, I've been maintaining his technology and waiting for the right moment to reveal it, Elena continued. I thought that moment was when you inherited the warehouse, but I was wrong. It was a trap. Jack felt ice forming in his stomach. What kind of trap? Elena activated her tablet and showed Jack a series of encrypted communications she'd been monitoring. Your inheritance was never secret, Jack. The CIA has been tracking Victor's family for decades, waiting for someone to activate the biometric locks and reveal the location of his hidden research. She pointed to message timestamps. They knew. You'd found the prototype within hours of your first visit. Then why didn't they move to stop me immediately? Because they needed to know the full extent of what Victor had hidden. The warehouse was just one location. They needed to identify all the prototypes and research facilities before acting. Dune, Elena's expression grew grim. They've been using you as bait, Jack. Every time you visit, every time you access new areas of the building, you've been mapping Victor's entire network for them. Jack sank back into his chair, overwhelmed by the layers of deception. So my family wasn't mocking me, they were protecting me. No, that part was real, but someone in your family has been reporting your activities to federal agents. Look at this communication intercept from yesterday. Elena showed him a text message exchange. Subject visited warehouse again today. Spent 4 hours in building. Recommend immediate intervention before network activation. The phone number was one Jack recognized. It belonged to his brother Tom. Tom's been spying on me? Elena pulled out a financial document that made Jack's heart sink. Your brother has been receiving quarterly payments from a Department of Energy slush fund for the past 5 years, $25,000 every 3 months, officially classified as consulting fees for energy sector analysis. Jack stared at the payment records, remembering Tom's persistent pressure to sell the warehouse, his dismissive attitude toward Victor's stories, his convenient visits that always seemed timed to coincide with Jack's trips to the building. He's been bought, Jack said quietly. The program is called Family Asset Development, Elena explained. They identify relatives of suppressed researchers and cultivate them as long-term intelligence sources. Your brother probably doesn't even realize he's working for the CIA. He thinks he's helping a legitimate government agency monitor potentially dangerous technology. The sound of approaching helicopters cut through their conversation. Elena rushed to the monitors and confirmed what Jack feared. Federal agents were preparing for a full assault on the building. Elena, if they've been planning this for 30 years, how do we have any chance of stopping them? Elena smiled for the first time since revealing her true identity. Because your grandfather was smarter than any of us realized. He didn't just build 3 prototypes, he built a dead man's switch. She activated a new control panel that had been hidden until that moment. If this facility is compromised or destroyed, the other 2 prototypes automatically activate and begin broadcasting the complete research data to every university physics department in the world. Jack watched as the system began its countdown sequence. How much time do we have? 30 minutes until automatic activation, unless we can get to one of the other facilities and input the abort code. Elena gathered the most critical documents and thrust them into Jack's hands. Jack, the facility beneath Victor's old house. Do you know where your grandfather lived before he disappeared? Millbrook, about 6 blocks from here. The house is still in family hands. My cousin rents it out." Jack realized what Elena was suggesting. "You want me to break into the basement of an occupied house? I want you to save your grandfather's life work and potentially transform human civilization," Elena replied firmly. "The choice is yours, but in 29 minutes, that choice disappears forever." Above them, the sound of drilling had stopped. In the sudden silence, Jack could hear boots moving systematically through the upper floors of the warehouse. They were out of time for debate. Jack looked around the chamber one last time at the prototype his grandfather had built and Elena had protected, at the technology that could free humanity from dependence on fossil fuels, at the dream that powerful forces had spent 70 years trying to destroy. His grandfather had made his choice in 1952. Elena had made hers in 1963. Now it was Jack's turn to decide whether some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost. He pocketed Victor's keys and headed for the emergency exit. The activation key sequence was more complex than Jack had imagined. Not just mechanical switches and electrical connections, but a carefully orchestrated series of biometric scans, temporal synchronization, and quantum field alignments that required precise coordination across all 3 prototype locations. Elena led Jack through the underground tunnel system that connected the warehouse to the old residential district, their route illuminated by the same softly glowing tubes Victor had installed throughout his hidden network. The tunnels were clearly maintained, with fresh air circulation and structural supports that had been updated over the decades. "Your grandfather spent 15 years building this infrastructure," Elena explained, as they moved quickly through the passages. "He knew that if his technology ever needed to be activated in an emergency, conventional communication methods might be compromised." They emerged through a concealed entrance in the basement of Victor's old house, now owned by Jack's cousin Danny and rented to a young couple who worked night shifts at the hospital. The basement appeared normal. Furnace, water heater, storage shelves, but Elena quickly located the hidden panel that revealed the second prototype chamber. This facility was smaller than the warehouse installation, but more advanced, clearly representing Victor's continued development work during his years in hiding. The prototype sphere was nearly identical to the first, but surrounded by additional monitoring equipment and what appeared to be communication arrays. "Elena, how do I know my family will believe any of this?" Jack asked as she began activating systems that had been dormant for decades. "Even if I can prove the technology works, how do I convince them to help when one of them has been betraying us all along?" Elena paused in her preparations and looked at Jack seriously. "Because your grandfather built something into the activation sequence that makes deception impossible. When all 3 prototypes are synchronized, they create a quantum entanglement field that amplifies truth and makes lies literally painful to maintain." She gestured to a communication device that looked like a modified radio. "Anyone connected to the network during activation experiences complete emotional transparency." Jack felt his phone buzzing with text messages. Sarah was calling from Boston. "Dad, where are you? Tom says federal agents are looking for you." Michael had sent 3 texts. "What's going on?" "Tom says you're in some kind of trouble with the government." "They know something's happening," Jack told Elena. "Good. That means the network is already beginning to resonate." Elena handed Jack a device that looked like a sophisticated smartphone, but displayed readings he didn't understand. "This will allow you to communicate with anyone carrying Mercer DNA, regardless of distance or normal communication channels. Your grandfather built it to work through the quantum field generated by the prototypes." Jack activated the device and immediately heard his children's voices, not through speakers, but seeming to come from inside his own mind. "Dad, what is this? I'm hearing your voice, but you're not on the phone." Sarah's mental voice carried confusion and fear. "Jack Mercer, this is some kind of weird dream, right?" Michael's presence felt more distant, but clear. "It's not a dream," Jack thought back to them, amazed by the clarity of the connection. "I'm in Millbrook, in Grandpa Victor's house. I need you to listen to me very carefully because we don't have much time." Elena was working at the prototype controls, synchronizing the second facility with the warehouse installation. "Jack, you need to start the explanation now. The federal agents have entered the underground chamber at the warehouse. We have maybe 15 minutes before they force their way into the prototype room." Jack took a deep breath and began transmitting the truth to his children. The warehouse inheritance wasn't worthless, Victor hadn't been an eccentric dreamer, and the family had been wrong about everything for 30 years. But through the quantum connection, his children experienced not just his words, but his emotions, his memories, and his absolute conviction that what he was saying was true. "Dad, I can feel what you're feeling. This is impossible, but I believe you." Sarah's mental presence grew stronger, more focused. "What do you need us to do?" Michael's response was more skeptical, but equally clear. "Okay, assuming this is real and not some kind of breakdown, why are federal agents involved? What aren't you telling us?" Jack looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. "Because your great-grandfather developed technology that could end humanity's dependence on fossil fuels, and there are people who would rather destroy it than let it change the world." Through the quantum link, Jack shared Victor's journal entries, Elena's revelations about government suppression, and the current crisis threatening to destroy 70 years of hidden research. His children experienced the information not as abstract concepts, but as lived reality, feeling the weight of the decision their family faced. "We're coming to Millbrook," Sarah transmitted immediately. "I'm already in my car." "Me too," Michael added. "But Dad, if Uncle Tom has been working with federal agents, won't he try to stop us?" Elena looked up from the prototype controls. "That's where the quantum field's truth amplification becomes crucial. Tom can't maintain his deception while connected to the network. He'll either have to admit his betrayal or disconnect entirely." Jack activated a broader communication channel and reached out to his brothers. "Tom Ray, I need you to listen to something important." Tom's response came through filled with panic and guilt. "Jack, you need to surrender to the federal agents. This technology is dangerous. It could destabilize the entire economy." But through the quantum link, Jack could feel Tom's underlying emotions: fear, shame, and the desperate rationalization of someone who had been compromised for years. Ray's presence was cleaner, confused, but without the guilty resonance that marked Tom's deception. "Tom, how long have you been taking money from the government?" Jack asked directly. The silence that followed was answer enough. Through the link, everyone connected could feel Tom's anguish as his carefully maintained justifications crumbled under the pressure of absolute transparency. 5 years, Tom finally admitted. "They told me it was about national security, about preventing foreign powers from accessing dangerous American technology. They said they were protecting the family. Elena was monitoring federal activity through the prototype surveillance systems." "Jack, they've breached the warehouse's lower levels. We need to make the activation decision now." Sarah's mental voice cut through the confusion. "Dad, I'm 20 minutes from Millbrook. Whatever we're going to do, I want to be part of it." Michael added, "I'm driving through the night. I'll be there by morning, but can we hold them off that long?" Elena showed Jack the activation sequence display. "The system is designed to function with a minimum of 2 synchronized operators, but 3 would be safer. We can begin the sequence with you and me, but we'll need at least 1 more family member at the 3rd location to complete it." Jack realized the weight of the decision he was making. Activating Victor's network would reveal the technology to the world, but it would also put his entire family at the center of a conflict between corporate interests and environmental necessity. "Elena, what happens if we succeed? What happens if we get the technology working and prove it can change everything?" Elena's smile was grim but determined. "Then we spend the rest of our lives fighting people who make trillions of dollars from scarcity and environmental destruction." She paused as new alarms sounded through the basement chamber. But Jack, what happens if we don't try? Through the quantum link, Jack felt his family's presence more clearly than he had in years. Sarah's fierce determination, Michael's analytical mind working through the implications, even Tom's guilt-ridden desire to finally do something right. They were all connected now, all facing the same choice Victor had confronted in 1952. The difference was that this time, the family wasn't scattered and dismissive. This time, they understood what they were fighting for. Jack placed his hand on the activation key sequence and looked at Elena. "Tell me exactly what we need to do." The master control panel emerged from what had appeared to be a solid wall, revealing an interface that combined 1950s analog gauges with technology that seemed decades ahead of its time. Jack's hands shook slightly as Elena guided him through the preliminary activation sequence, each switch and lever representing a choice that would determine the fate of his grandfather's life work. The system requires biometric confirmation from at least 2 Mercer family members, Elena explained, positioning Jack's palm over a scanning device that hummed with subtle energy. Once you begin the sequence, there's a 15-minute window to complete activation at all 3 facilities. If we fail, the prototypes will automatically shut down permanently to prevent seizure. Through the quantum communication link, Sarah's presence felt closer. "Dad, I'm pulling into Millbrook now. Where do I need to go?" Elena consulted a map showing the 3 prototype locations. "The 3rd facility is in an abandoned mine shaft about 12 miles south of town. Victor chose it because the deep underground location provides natural shielding from electromagnetic interference." Jack pressed his hand to the scanner, feeling a warm, tingling sensation as the device confirmed his genetic identity and biometric patterns. The control panel came alive with displays showing the status of all 3 prototypes and the federal agent's progress toward the warehouse facility. "Jack, they've reached the prototype chamber," Elena reported, monitoring security. "Veeds, 6 agents in full tactical gear, plus someone in a suit who appears to be in charge." She enhanced the image. "I recognize him. Deputy Director Marcus Webb, CIA. He's the one who's been coordinating the suppression program." On the screen, Webb was directing his team to position shaped charges around Victor's original prototype. Jack realized with horror that they weren't planning to study or confiscate the technology. They were going to destroy it completely. "Sarah, change your plans," Jack transmitted through the quantum link. "Head directly to the mine location. Elena will send you coordinates." "Dad, what about the agents at the warehouse?" Elena was working frantically at the control system. "If we can get 2 facilities activated before they destroy the first prototype, the network can sustain itself through quantum entanglement. But the timing has to be perfect." Jack felt Michael's presence joining the communication link. "I'm still 4 hours out, but I can guide Sarah through the technical sequence if needed. Dad, what exactly are we fighting for here?" Through the quantum connection, Jack shared not just information, but emotional understanding. The weight of Victor's sacrifice, the potential for transforming human civilization, and the immediate threat of seeing 70 years of revolutionary research destroyed by corporate interests. Michael's response carried new determination. "Understood. Sarah, I'm sending you everything I can find about underground mining access in that area. There should be a maintenance entrance about a 1/4 mile from the main shaft." Elena activated the first stage of the synchronization sequence. Throughout the basement, Victor's prototype began humming with increased intensity, and the quantum field grew stronger. Jack could feel the connection to his family becoming more vivid, more immediate. But he could also sense something else, resistance, from someone else connected to the network. "Tom's fighting the connection," Elena observed, monitoring the quantum field readings. "He's trying to block the link while maintaining surveillance contact with the federal agents." Jack reached out through the network. "Tom, you have to choose. Either help us preserve Grandpa's work or help them destroy it, but you can't do both." Tom's mental response was anguished. "Jack, you don't understand the implications. This technology could destabilize entire nations. The economic disruption could cause wars, revolutions, or it could end energy poverty and stop climate change," Sarah interjected, her presence now much stronger as she approached the third facility. "Uncle Tom, I can feel your fear, but I can also feel your guilt. You know which side is right." Elena was tracking multiple threats simultaneously. "Jack, Webb's team is preparing to detonate charges in 3 minutes. Sarah needs to reach the mine entrance and begin her activation. Sequence immediately." Sarah's voice came through the quantum link with fierce determination. "I'm at the mine entrance. Elena, guide me through this." Elena began transmitting detailed technical instructions while monitoring the warehouse situation. Jack watched Webb's team make final preparations to destroy the original prototype, the same device that had operated continuously since 1952, proving the viability of Victor's revolutionary approach to clean energy. "System activation in 90 seconds, Elena announced. Jack placed both hands on the primary control interface. Jack felt the warm metal surfaces respond to his touch, and suddenly the basement chamber was filled with a low harmonic tone that seemed to resonate in his bones. The prototype's energy output increased dramatically, and the quantum communication field expanded to encompass a much wider area. Through the enhanced connection, Jack could sense not just his immediate family, but dozens of other people throughout. Millbrook, neighbors who were suddenly aware of strange harmonics in their homes, utility workers who noticed impossible readings on their monitoring equipment, and federal agents whose electronic surveillance devices were beginning to malfunction due to quantum interference. "Sarah, are you ready?" Elena called through the link. "Ready, I can see the control panel. It looks exactly like Dad's. The biometric scanner is active." Elena's voice carried urgency. "Simultaneous activation in 10 seconds. Jack, maintain contact with the primary interface. Sarah, place your hand on the scanner on my mark." Webb's team was positioning their final charges when alarms began sounding throughout their equipment. The quantum field generated by the activated prototypes was interfering with their electronics, causing their detonators to malfunction. 5 seconds, Elena counted down. 4, 3, 2, 1. Activate. Jack pressed his palms firmly against the control surfaces while Sarah confirmed activation at the mine facility. The harmonic tone grew louder, and suddenly the basement was filled with the same soft, warm light that had been glowing in the warehouse office for 30 years. But something unexpected happened. Instead of simply powering up, the synchronized prototypes began broadcasting, not just energy, but information. Technical specifications, operating procedures, and complete documentation of Victor's research began transmitting to receivers. Elena had apparently prepared throughout the region. "Elena, what's happening?" Elena's expression showed satisfaction and relief. "Your grandfather's final gift, Jack. He programmed the network to disseminate all research data the moment it was successfully activated by family members. The complete technical specifications for clean energy generation are now being transmitted to every major university, research institution, and environmental organization in the world." Through the quantum link, Jack felt Tom's presence suddenly change. The guilt and fear were still there, but they were now mixed with something else, wonder at what his family had actually accomplished. "Jack!" Tom's voice came through clearly for the first time. "I can see the energy readings from here. This is real. This actually works." Webb's team was retreating from the warehouse as their equipment failed, and the quantum field made their position untenable. But Jack realized their victory might be temporary. Forces powerful enough to suppress revolutionary technology for 70 years wouldn't surrender after one defeat. The real battle was just beginning. Victor's final message activated when all three prototypes achieved full synchronization, his voice filling the basement chamber with the warmth and wisdom Jack remembered from childhood. The recording had been waiting 70 years for this moment. "My dear family," Victor's slightly accented voice began, "if you are hearing this, then the technology has been successfully activated and the research data is being shared with the world. I am proud of your courage, but I must warn you that your struggles are just beginning." Elena watched the transmission monitors as Victor's research data reached universities across 6 continents. Within minutes, physics departments were confirming the theoretical basis for quantum energy harvesting. Environmental groups were calculating the potential impact on carbon emissions, and news organizations were broadcasting the first reports of a revolutionary clean energy breakthrough. The forces that suppressed this technology in 1952 will not surrender easily, Victor's message continued. They will claim the technology is dangerous, unproven, or economically disruptive. They will attack your credibility, your motives, and your family. But remember that some discoveries belong to all humanity, not just those with power. Through the quantum link, Jack felt his family's presence growing stronger as the network stabilized. Sarah was monitoring news feeds from the mine facility, watching global reaction to the sudden appearance of functional clean energy technology. Michael had arrived in Millbrook and was coordinating with environmental lawyers who were already filing injunctions to prevent government seizure of the prototypes. But it was Tom's transformation that amazed Jack most. The guilt and fear that had marked his presence for years were being replaced by determination and hope as he finally understood what his family had preserved. "Jack, I've been such a fool." Tom's voice came through the quantum connection with painful clarity. "They convinced me that I was protecting the family by reporting your activities. I never realized, I never understood what Grandpa had actually built." Victor's message addressed this directly. To any family member who may have been compromised by government or corporate pressure, know that forgiveness is always possible when you choose to stand for truth. The quantum field generated by this technology makes deception impossible, but it also makes redemption immediate. Elena was fielding calls from research institutions worldwide, all requesting access to the complete technical specifications. "Jack, MIT wants to begin replication experiments immediately. Stanford is offering to establish a research consortium. The European Space Agency thinks the technology could revolutionize satellite power systems." But Jack was watching more concerning developments on the news feeds. Energy company stock prices were plummeting as investors realized the implications of free, clean power generation. Government officials were calling for immediate investigation of unverified claims about revolutionary technology. Corporate spokesmen were already questioning the safety and reliability of systems that had been operating flawlessly for 7 decades. "Dad, you need to see this," Sarah transmitted from the mine facility. "They're mobilizing a massive response. FBI, Department of Energy, even military units are being deployed to secure potentially dangerous technology." Victor's message seemed to anticipate this reaction. They will claim that rapid adoption of clean energy would destabilize the economy and threaten national security. But ask yourselves, whose security are they really protecting? The security of ordinary people who need affordable, clean energy, or the security of profits built on scarcity and environmental destruction? Michael's presence joined the conversation with urgency. "I'm monitoring federal communications through some contacts in the tech industry. They're planning to invoke national emergency powers to seize all 3 facilities within hours. We need legal protection fast." Elena activated additional systems that had been hidden within Victor's network. "Your grandfather prepared for this." Scenario 2. The quantum field isn't just connecting family members, it's also documenting everything. Every conversation, every decision, every attempt at suppression. is being recorded and transmitted to independent servers worldwide. Jack watched as monitors throughout the basement displayed global response to the technology reveal. Environmental groups were organizing rallies in major cities. University physics departments were conducting emergency peer review sessions. International climate organizations were calling for immediate deployment of the clean energy systems to combat global warming. But corporate and government pushback was equally swift. Energy company executives were meeting in emergency sessions. Government officials were classifying the technology as a potential weapon. Media outlets owned by fossil fuel interests were broadcasting warnings about untested technology and economic chaos. "The pattern is exactly what Grandpa described in his journal," Jack said, through the quantum link. "They're using the same arguments they used in 1952. Victor's message continued. "I have spent 30 years refining not just the technology, but the methods for protecting it from those who would suppress it for profit. The quantum field generated by the synchronized prototypes creates a zone of truth that makes deception difficult to maintain. Those who approach with honest intentions will find the technology responds to them. Those who approach with harmful intent will find their efforts frustrated by the field itself." Elena pointed to readings showing the quantum field's expanding influence. "Jack, look at this. The field is affecting electronic systems throughout a 50-mile radius. Government surveillance equipment is malfunctioning. Corporate communication systems are experiencing spontaneous transparency. Internal memos are being automatically forwarded to news organizations." Through the quantum connection, Tom's voice carried amazement. "I'm seeing classified documents from my own government contacts appearing on my computer screen. Internal communications about the suppression program, financial records showing payments to family members, strategic plans for discrediting clean energy research. It's all being exposed automatically." Sarah's presence radiated excitement from the mine facility. "Dad, the prototype here is doing something incredible. It's not just generating clean energy, it's actively cleaning the environment. Air quality readings in the mine are improving by the hour. The quantum field seems to be neutralizing pollution at the molecular level." Victor's message addressed this phenomenon. The technology's benefits extend far beyond energy generation. The quantum field manipulation principles can be applied to environmental restoration, medical healing, and even psychological well-being. Humanity is not just inheriting clean energy. You are inheriting tools for planetary and personal transformation. But Jack could see federal vehicles approaching the residential area where Victor's house sat. Despite the quantum field's protective effects, government forces were still attempting to seize the technology through overwhelming force. "Elena, how do we protect the prototypes if they bring in enough manpower to simply occupy all 3 facilities?" Elena smiled with the confidence of someone who had spent decades preparing for this moment. Victor built one final safeguard into the system. If the prototypes are threatened with seizure or destruction, they can transfer their accumulated energy and information to any other location where someone with Mercer DNA creates the proper quantum resonance field. She gestured to a device Jack hadn't noticed before, a portable version of the prototype technology, small enough to fit in a briefcase, but apparently capable of sustaining the entire network if necessary. The technology can propagate itself. "Jack, every time someone with the right genetic markers and moral intentions activates a new node, the network grows stronger and more distributed. They can't suppress it anymore because it's no longer centralized." Through the quantum link, Michael's voice carried realization. "It's like a technological seed that can sprout anywhere the right conditions exist. Dad, you're not just inheriting Grandpa's research, you're inheriting the responsibility to plant it everywhere it can grow." Victor's message reached its conclusion. "My beloved family, you now hold the power to transform human civilization or to let it continue down a path toward environmental and social destruction. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The window for peaceful transition to sustainable energy closes more each day. Use the gifts I have left you wisely, and remember that some discoveries are too important for any single person or nation to control. Jack felt the weight of his grandfather's trust, the hopes of his family, and the potential to affect millions of lives through the decisions he made in the next few hours. The quantum field had revealed the technology to the world, but it would take human courage and determination to ensure it was used for humanity's benefit rather than suppressed by entrenched interests. Federal agents were now surrounding Victor's house, but Jack realized they were no longer fighting just to preserve one man's research. They were fighting for the future of human energy independence, environmental restoration, and the possibility that powerful technologies could serve everyone rather than just the wealthy. The real victory wouldn't come from protecting the prototypes. It would come from ensuring Victor's technology spread so widely that no force on Earth could contain it. 6 months later, Jack stood before the warehouse that had started it all, watching construction crews installing solar panels and wind turbines to supplement the clean energy flowing from Victor's prototype network. The building was no longer abandoned. It had become the headquarters of the Jack Mercer Foundation for Clean Energy, a non-profit organization dedicated to ensuring Victor's technology served humanity rather than corporate interests. The transformation had been neither easy nor quick. Federal agents had attempted to seize all 3 prototype facilities, but the quantum field's effects had made their efforts increasingly difficult. Electronic surveillance equipment continued to malfunction in the presence of the activated technology, while classified documents related to energy suppression had spontaneously appeared on news websites worldwide. Within weeks, public pressure had forced government officials to abandon seizure attempts and instead negotiate for regulated access to the technology. Elena emerged from the Foundation's new research laboratory, carrying a tablet displaying global deployment statistics. 43 universities have successfully replicated the basic prototype design, she reported with satisfaction. Environmental organizations have established clean energy nodes in 12 countries. The technology is spreading faster than anyone can suppress it. Jack smiled as he watched his daughter Sarah coordinating with international climate researchers through the quantum communication network. She had taken a leave of absence from her marketing job in Boston to become the Foundation's Director of Global Partnerships, applying her business skills to the challenge of transforming energy infrastructure worldwide. Michael had moved his family to Millbrook and established a technology consulting firm specializing in quantum field applications. His engineering background proved invaluable in adapting Victor's 1950s designs for modern manufacturing and distribution. The portable prototype units he developed could be built in any well-equipped machine shop, making the technology accessible to communities worldwide. Even Tom had found redemption through the Foundation's work. His connections in the business and political worlds, once used to monitor and report on the family's activities, now helped navigate regulatory challenges and build support for clean energy adoption. The quantum field's influence had made his guilt impossible to hide, but it had also made his genuine desire for redemption equally transparent. "Dad, you should see the latest environmental impact reports," Sarah called from her coordination station. Air quality in regions with active prototype networks has improved by an average of 30%. Carbon emissions from those areas have dropped by 60%. Grandpa's technology isn't just providing clean energy, it's actively healing environmental damage. Jack walked through the warehouse's main floor, now filled with workshops where local residents learned to build and maintain quantum energy systems. The dying industrial town of Millbrook had become a destination for researchers, environmental activists, and anyone interested in sustainable technology. Property values were rising, new businesses were opening, and young people were returning. to a community that offered hope rather than just memories. The town's transformation reflected broader changes taking place worldwide. Energy companies had been forced to adapt or face irrelevance as communities established energy independence through Victor's technology. Some corporations had embraced the transition, investing in quantum field research and sustainable infrastructure. Others had fought the changes, but found themselves increasingly isolated as public opinion shifted toward environmental responsibility. Elena joined Jack in the main workshop area, where a dozen local residents were assembling portable prototype units for shipment to communities in developing nations. "Your grandfather would be amazed to see this," she said, gesturing toward the industrious scene. He dreamed of technology that would serve everyone, not just the wealthy and powerful. Jack picked up one of the completed portable units, marveling at its elegant simplicity. The basic quantum field generator was no larger than a briefcase, but it could provide clean energy for an entire neighborhood, while actively purifying air and water in the surrounding area. Michael had designed the units to be manufactured using readily available materials and maintained by people with basic technical skills. "Elena, do you think we've won? Or are we still fighting the same battle Grandpa faced in 1952? Elena considered the question carefully. The technology is too widespread now to be suppressed the way it was 70 years ago. But the forces that opposed Victor are still active. They've just changed tactics. Instead of classification and secrecy, they're using regulation and economic pressure. Instead of making researchers disappear, they're trying to control how the technology is implemented." Jack understood what she meant. Government agencies had established licensing requirements for quantum energy systems. Corporate interests were attempting to patent variations on Victor's basic designs. International trade organizations were negotiating agreements that could limit technology sharing between nations. But the quantum field's influence continued to expand, and its effects on human consciousness were becoming increasingly apparent. Communities with active prototype networks reported reduced conflict, increased cooperation, and more transparent local governance. The field seemed to amplify human capacity for honesty and empathy, while making deception and manipulation more difficult to sustain. "Sarah, what's the latest from the International Coordination Network?" Jack asked. Sarah looked up from her communication station, her face glowing with excitement. "Dad, you're not going to believe this. Researchers in Australia have discovered that the quantum field can accelerate plant growth and increase crop yields. Teams in Africa are using the technology to purify water supplies and reverse desertification. Scientists in Antarctica report that prototype installations are helping heal ozone layer damage." Jack felt a familiar sense of awe at the scope of his grandfather's vision. Victor hadn't just developed clean energy technology. He had created tools for planetary healing that were only now revealing their full potential. Michael appeared from the development laboratory, carrying a device that looked like a simplified version of Victor's original control interface. "Dad, I want to show you something. We've miniaturized the quantum field generator to the point where it can be integrated into everyday devices. Imagine smartphones that never need charging, electric vehicles with unlimited range, medical equipment that can operate anywhere without power infrastructure." Elena studied the miniaturized device with professional interest. Victor always said the technology would evolve beyond his original designs. He built adaptability into the quantum field principles themselves. The more widely they're used, the more applications become apparent. Jack walked to the window overlooking the warehouse district, noting how the abandoned buildings around them were being renovated and repurposed. The neighborhood that had been dying just 6 months earlier was now alive with activity as researchers, manufacturers, and visitors contributed to the local economy. "What do you think happens next?" Jack asked Elena. "I think," Elena replied thoughtfully, that we're witnessing the beginning of a fundamental shift in how human civilization relates to energy, environment, and each other. The quantum field effects seem to promote cooperation over competition, transparency over secrecy, and long-term thinking over short-term profit. She paused, watching construction crews installing quantum energy systems on buildings throughout the district. But I also think your grandfather's most important lesson was about the power of individual choice. He could have sold his technology to the highest bidder in 1951, or surrendered it to government control. Instead, he chose to preserve it for future generations who might use it more wisely. Jack nodded, understanding the parallel to his own situation. The Foundation had received offers from corporations willing to pay billions for exclusive licensing rights to Victor's technology. Government agencies had proposed partnerships that would have provided funding and protection in exchange for regulatory control. International organizations had suggested treaties that would have legitimized the technology while limiting its accessibility. But Jack had chosen differently. Following his grandfather's example, he had structured the Foundation to ensure the technology remained freely available to anyone committed to using it for environmental and social benefit. The quantum field's truth-amplifying effects made it relatively easy to distinguish between those who approached with genuine good intentions and those who sought to exploit the technology for personal gain. "Dad!" Sarah called from her coordination station. "There's something else you should know. The quantum communication network has reached critical mass. We now have active connections with clean energy researchers on every continent. The field is strong enough that new nodes can be established almost anywhere by people who understand the basic principles." Jack smiled, remembering Victor's words about discoveries that belong to all humanity. His grandfather's technology had, indeed, become too widespread and too beneficial to suppress. But it had also evolved beyond anything one person or organization could control. The warehouse where it all began now housed a global movement, but Jack knew the real victory wasn't in the buildings or equipment. It was in the choices people made every day to embrace sustainable technology over destructive alternatives, cooperation over competition, and long-term wisdom over short-term gain. As the sun set over Millbrook's revitalized industrial district, Jack reflected on the journey that had brought his family from mockery and dismissal to global leadership. In clean energy technology, his grandfather's worthless warehouse had indeed turned out to be worth more than anyone imagined. Not in dollars, but in hope for a sustainable future. The light that never went out was no longer hidden in a single building. It was spreading throughout the world, one quantum field at a time, proving that some inheritances are too important to be measured in money and too valuable to be kept secret. Victor Mercer's dream of clean, free energy for all humanity was finally becoming reality, one family's courage at a time.